The year was 1975, and in the Washington, D.C. suburb of Wheaton, Maryland, spring vacation from school was underway. It was late March, and the town was preparing to celebrate the upcoming Easter holiday at the end of the month. On the 25th of March, sisters Sheila and Katherine Lyon took advantage of their time off school and headed out to visit their local shopping mall. The mall had set up decorations and other exhibits in honor of the Easter holiday, and the girls were interested in seeing them. They agreed to their mother's request that they be home by 4 p.m., and they set off. Tragically, it was the last time their mother would ever see them, as the pair vanished that same day. At 7 p.m. on the day they went missing, police were notified and began an investigation into their disappearance. They questioned local witnesses at the Wheaton Plaza Mall in order to piece together a timeline of the actions taken by the girls before they went missing. About an hour after they left home, they were seen by a neighborhood boy outside of the Orange Bowl, a pizza restaurant located at the mall. They were talking to an older man, around 50 to 60 years old. There was something distinctive about this man. It wasn't the brown suit he was wearing, or the fact that he was 6 feet tall. The man was going around the mall asking children to speak into a microphone he was holding. He was carrying a briefcase with a tape recorder in it that was taping what the kids said. Naturally, after hearing about a man doing something so conspicuous, police placed him as one of their prime suspects. They created some composite sketches of him, released them to the public, and the tips started rolling in. About 2 weeks after Sheila and Katherine went missing, a witness report came in about 2 girls bound and gagged in the back of a station wagon in Manassas, Virginia. The person driving the car resembled the prime suspect police were looking for. Police relayed the sighting to the public, and a group of civilians using CB radios searched the area and their vehicles, communicating anything they found suspicious to each other. Unfortunately, neither the police nor the community were able to find any trace of the vehicle. Police also later identified this witness report as questionable. The lead fizzled out. A huge update in the case came when multiple people came forward and told authorities that they remember seeing the prime suspect before the girls went missing, again approaching young girls in public. Witnesses mentioned that they had seen the man at 2 other shopping centers a few weeks earlier, talking to young girls. But his actions did not end up being as suspicious as they might have first seemed. He was having the girls read from an index card that he had typed an answering machine message onto. Maybe he thought it would be cute for a kid's voice to greet you when he missed your call. Perhaps he was looking for some heavily discounted voice acting work for his business. Whatever the case, police shifted their investigation away from this man upon learning of his actions, and never directly linked him to the disappearance of Sheila and Katherine. And the trail went cold. Over the next months, empty lots and the beds of streams and rivers were searched for the remains of the girls. The community was frantically looking everywhere they could, and on May 23rd of 1975, 122 National Guardsmen were sent into a Montgomery County forest to search for the girls. None of these efforts were able to locate them. The chaos in the community became a terrible storm, with the man in the suit at the heart of it. It was difficult for anything other than information relating to this man to break into the furious scramble for answers. It is precisely because of that fact that investigators brushed off a singular event that would have saved the family of the missing girls 38 years of agony. And the most tragic part is, at the time, there was no way for investigators to know any better. When the Lyon sisters first disappeared, a young friend of theirs came forward with a strange experience she had in the mall on the day they went missing. The girl had noticed a young man staring intently at the pair for a long while, much longer than necessary. The staring was so exaggerated that the girl actually went up to the man and confronted him about it. She described the man as white, in his late teens or early 20s, wearing scruffy clothes and with a few scars on his left cheek. A sketch of this man was created, although it seems that it was not widely spread. Overall, the little girl's story seemed a bizarre occurrence, but it didn't offer much for the police to go on. And the The description didn't match the suited man they were looking for, so it was quietly filed away somewhere. Apparently, the staring man did not want to be forgotten. About 1 week after Sheila and Katherine disappeared, a young man approached a security guard at the Wheaton Plaza Mall, claiming that he had seen a man in a suit talking to the girls and holding a tape recorder out to them. Suspiciously, his claim was made on the same day local newspapers had printed a story drawing attention to this suited man. He elaborated on his claim, stating that he had seen the suspect forcing Sheila and Katherine into a car. The security guard then alerted authorities, and investigators arrived at the mall to take the 18-year-old to a police station for an interview. After giving the police his story, he agreed to participate in a polygraph test in an attempt to verify the authenticity of his claims. He failed the polygraph. He was dismissed shortly thereafter, with investigators chalking him up as just another person going after the $7,000 reward that had been advertised by the newspaper. And so, Lloyd Welch shrank back into the darkness, carrying a terrible secret that no one would pry from him for over 38 years. As the years passed, cold case teams at the Montgomery County Police Department would periodically browse through deteriorating evidence, searching for answers that would bring closure to the suffering Lyon family. Time was failing to heal the family's wounds, instead ripping them wider with each passing day. Very little progress was made until in 2013, investigator Chris Homrock discovered Lloyd Welch's interview transcript buried amongst piles of paperwork. Chris and his partner Dave Davis decided to visit Welch. He had mentioned some details about the suited man in his story that ended up being accurate once police had interviewed the prime suspect. Maybe he actually saw something that was missed regarding the suited man and was dismissed too early. The detectives traveled to Delaware to find Welch. He was finishing up a 33-year prison sentence for having molested a 10-year-old girl. Detectives knew something was amiss when they sat down to talk to Welch, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I know why you're here. You're here about those 2 missing kids." The detectives were originally looking at a man named Ray Molesky as a possible suspect for the abduction of Sheila and Katherine. They were mainly thinking that Welch had helped Molesky out in some way. But Welch ended up letting something slip that chilled the investigators to the bone. After continually denying that he did anything to the Lyon sisters, Welch was instead asked what he thought Ray Molesky might have done to them. He replied with, "My opinion is that he killed him. He killed him and he probably burned him. I don't know." The detectives instantly focused on the final detail that left Welch's mouth: cremation of the girls' bodies. It was a very specific and gruesome detail, one that would motivate detectives to keep questioning Welch, as they now felt there was definitely something he was hiding regarding this crime. Over the next few months, detectives questioned Welch, and he continually changed the story of his involvement in the girls' disappearances. He brought up his cousin, uncle, and his father as being the people that murdered Sheila and Katherine. He claimed that his uncle Richard had been the mastermind, planning the abduction of the girls and leading the abuse and murder that they suffered. In February of 2015, when summoned before a grand jury, Richard denied transporting, sexually abusing, or having any involvement in general with Sheila and Katherine, his right hand to God. Although he was adamant his uncle had murdered the girls, Welch had a purposely confusing nature, and so detectives continued investigating other possibilities for the girls' disappearances. Another horrifying claim by Welch was that after his uncle Richard had murdered the girls, he dismembered them and charged Welch with disposing of the evidence. The claim of this disposal was backed up by Welch's cousins in 2014, after they found out he was being considered as a suspect in the girls' disappearances. His cousin, Henry Parker, provided investigators with an account of a sinister request that Welch came to him with. Parker explained that Welch arrived in the spring of 1975 to his Virginia home with 2 green duffel bags that smelled of death. They were stained reddish brown and each weighed between 60 and 70 pounds. The pair built a bonfire, and Parker helped Welch throw the bags onto it without asking what was in them. Bone fragments were recovered during multiple digs at the Virginia property, but they were identified as non-human. A tooth was recovered on the property, but it was actually lost by the Bedford County Sheriff's Office before it could be forensically tested to see if it belonged to the sisters. With this new information, investigators were sure Welch was the key to getting more information on where Sheila and Katherine had gone, so they pressed on. With Welch's story constantly changing, it seemed like detectives were chasing leads in a never-ending maze while looking for the truth. In May of 2015, Detective Dave Davis went looking for the crime scene where Welch claimed his uncle Richard had murdered Sheila and Katherine. He never expected to discover something that would make all the pieces fall into place and expose Welch for the liar he had been the entire time. After arriving at the location where Welch claimed Richard had kept the girls, Dave immediately sensed something was wrong. Richard's old house had been torn down to make room for a courthouse, but Dave investigated the area and found that the local police headquarters was a very short distance away. Why would anyone that had just kidnapped 2 little girls bring them somewhere this close to authorities? He also checked for details that Welch had mentioned about the home, like railroad tracks being behind the house and a river being right in front of it, but found that these facts weren't true. Things weren't adding up, and it became clear to Dave that Welch had intentionally thrown in conflicting details to throw detectives off the trail. Dave then visited the spot that Welch claimed was where Richard had murdered the girls. It was at the end of a road, past a dead end, and down to where the river was. Welch had described it as a secluded spot under a bridge, but it was anything but that. The area was wide open with houses on either side, easily visible to anyone sitting in their homes or walking into the nearby businesses. Dave had hit another roadblock, his mind frantically trying to piece together a timeline with all the conflicting information he had in his head. He was heading back up the road he had traveled down when he saw a house that seemed eerily familiar to him. It suddenly hit him. It was the house he had seen in a photo in Welch's file, white with a fading blue trim. Welch had put this address down as his home when he had given his false statement all those years ago. Dave approached the house and asked the current owner if he could take a look at the basement. In all the stories that Welch had told, he claimed that Sheila and Katherine had been held in a basement before being taken to another place to be murdered. Welch had claimed the basement was in his friend's home and then his uncle's, but never his. In both scenarios, the basement was only accessible by walking around the house and entering it via steps that led down into it. Imagine the shock Dave must have felt when the woman who owned the property started leading him around the house and towards the backyard. They arrived at some steps which they climbed down, and Dave opened the door to a dingy-looking basement with 2 rooms inside of it. You had no access to the rest of the house from here, making the basement a sort of bunker that was hidden away from the outside world. Screams could be muffled in there, and anyone outside of the door would have no idea what was happening on the other side of it. The next day, Dave arranged for a forensic team to accompany him back to the property. They brought a blood detection agent and sprayed both rooms in the basement with it. The team shone blue light over the back room that had been treated with the agent, and the sight was gruesome. The room was glowing from the floor to the ceiling. An incredible amount of blood had been spilt in that room. Something horrific had taken place in the basement where Welch would hang out and smoke and drink. And unlike the stories Welch told, it happened in the house he had been living in. Thanks to these new discoveries, the detective's case against Welch was strengthened, and on September 12, 2017, Welch pleaded guilty to the 2 counts of felony murder that he was accused of. He was convicted and sentenced to 48 years in prison at 60 years old. He denies murdering the 2 girls to this day, but one only has to look at his past actions, like the sexual assault of a 10-year-old girl in 1996, or his attack on a 6-year-old girl, to see past his lies and to his true nature. In the case of the Lyon Sisters, Justice, although painfully slowly, eventually triumphed. And it was thanks to the hard work of detectives Chris Homrock, Dave Davis, Katie Leggett, and Mark Janey, as well as the rest of the Montgomery County Police Department. Due to their efforts, John and Mary Lyon, Sheila and Katherine's parents, were finally able to receive some closure after decades of pain and uncertainty. In this instance, evil was punished, and the person responsible for such a heinous crime will spend most of their life behind bars. Thank you for watching my video. My thoughts are with the family of Sheila and Katherine because although they have gotten some of the closure they sought, they are still missing their daughters, and that wound will never heal. Take care of yourselves out there, because as this case proves, you never know how close you are to brushing with evil. Catch you later.